Ancients are highly respected members of their chapter, and Bladeguard Ancients are even higher so, as they very clearly have spent their time serving in the First Company, which is exclusive to veterans in most Codex Astartes chapters. Anyways, I'm Spoons Battling, and today we are covering the Bladeguard Ancient, who is quite a sad story, so this is going to be quite a negative video. So, the Bladeguard Ancient comes in at 45 points, making him, I believe, the cheapest character of all the Space Marines, though there might be some Space Wolves that are a little cheaper. Though certainly in the core codex. He has 6 inches of movement, toughness 4, 3 plus save, 4 wounds, leadership 6 plus, and OC 1, which is a very standard Space Marine stat line. And is nothing to particularly write home about, and he does have a 4 plus invulnerable save, of course. But again, as I mentioned, really nothing that you need to worry about. You're getting a good character stat-wise for your points. Now, where things really, really start to fall apart is the unfortunate facts of his weaponry. He has a heavy bolt pistol, which is pretty standard for everything that comes in Indomitus, and that heavy bolt pistol is one attack that hits on 3s at 18-inch range with strength 4, AP 1, and damage 1, which is a very standard profile for a pistol. It's pretty good at killing guardsmen. And things like that. And then in terms of melee weapons, where things really fall apart, despite being a Bladeguard Ancient, he lacks a blade to guard with. He only has a close combat weapon, which is 5 attacks that hit on 2s at strength 4, AP 0, and damage 1, and this is pretty much what kills this character. In terms of abilities, he of course has Leader, which is, he can lead Bladeguard, unsurprisingly, but we'll cover that in a moment. And then in terms of abilities, he has the standard Ancient Astartes Banner, which is add 1 to the OC characteristics of models in this unit while leading a unit. And then he of course has Deeds of Heroism, which is sort of his unique ability, which is once per battle. You can activate this, and then you gain plus 1 attack on every model's melee weapons, which is a very solid buff, honestly. For 45 points, that's a really good buff. But as I mentioned earlier, he's let down by the fact that he has a really bad melee weapon. He barely hits harder than, say, an Intercessor, which is really not good, especially for 45 points, even though he is decently tough for the cost. Overall, that's the worst part about this guy, is his buff is restricted to melee, and he has no melee weapon. And as I mentioned, he can only lead the Bladeguard, which I have no problem with. But the problem is, while the Bladeguard appreciate those extra attacks, this guy adds nothing else to this team, and that sort of comes to a problem where this guy, say he's just leading a unit of 6 Bladeguard, he's essentially just adding 6 blade attacks, which is not bad, but for just a little bit more, you could get a Lieutenant who has pretty much the same thing, but with more melee, and even more so in terms of a Captain. If this guy just had a power sword, even a chain sword, something like just as simple as that, he would be 1,000,001 times better because he needs to be in melee, and he only can lead melee units, and his buff only applies in melee, as I mentioned already. This guy is just so close to being good. Honestly, in the next balanced data slate, they should just say, this guy's equipped with a mastercrafted power sword, and I'm certain this guy would shoot up. Like, I think he would be 15 times better with just that upgrade. Because then he would bring some actual muscle to the squad instead of just increasing the muscle of everybody else. Well, this guy can have the double leader skill, as most Ancients and similar characters have, where you can join alongside a Lieutenant or a Captain. Honestly, I don't ever see a reason to bring this guy over. If you're going for double characters, I would go Captain and Lieutenant, not Captain or Lieutenant and this guy. Because while this guy's buff is useful, it's the only thing he brings to the table, and he's 45 points. But we'll get back to that in a minute. We're going to quickly cover the core detachments, which, unsurprisingly, is sort of the same tone as the rest of the video, very negative. In terms of Gladius, I mean, Gladius, every unit is good in Gladius. He's fine there, as he'll ever be. Anvil, he has no shooting, can't buff shooting units, and doesn't really have any other benefits in terms of enhancements, so he really does nothing, and the detachment does nothing for him. In terms of Ironstorm, it's a vehicle detachment, obviously, which doesn't mean you don't want infantry, but it doesn't really aid to have a slow infantry character that adds nothing to the melee unit he's leading, and it's certainly not if you're running like a transport of sorts to get his Bladeguard to the front line. Is very, very pointless with this guy, again, because he has no melee weapon of his own, which means you're really wasting a lot of points. In terms of Firestorm, it's kind of the same story as everything else. He's so like weak-fisted in his own ways that the detachment doesn't really matter. In terms of Stormlance, speed is always good, especially for Bladeguard. They're naturally slow, and if you don't want to bring a transport for them, this is probably your best bet in terms of detachment, depending on the rest of your army, of course. But that's more so speaking on how Bladeguard appreciated and what this guy gets from it, which is pretty much nothing. Then in Vanguard, if you really are strapped for cash, or points, I suppose, and you want to infiltrate Bladeguard veterans, he's the cheapest one to do it. However, I still would not do that because there's better units to infiltrate and also better characters to lead Bladeguard that could do the same thing. And then in First Company, he's right at home because the First Company detachment sucks, and so does this guy. So, like detachment, like unit, as I wrote there. So in terms of standouts, in terms of chapter detachments, he has the Deathwing keyword, useless, Bladeguard already have it. I guess he's a little better in Sons of Sanguinius or the Liberator Task Force. +2 strength makes his melee good at killing guardsmen, I guess. But that's kind of the end of that story. And as I mentioned when we were covering his stats, I think this guy is almost there. Like, he's just like inches from the finish line of going from completely limp-fisted to a really good unit. Because if this guy had a power sword, like all of his Bladeguard compatriots, he would be able to actually aid in the fight in a way that's really impactful. And he would love his own buff. He would overall increase the power of the unit. He would be like pretty much as fighty as a Space Marine Lieutenant, which him with a captain. You could have your captain at 10 attacks, which obviously is really nasty. But he doesn't have that power sword, which means he's essentially a 45-point waste of space, really. The OC is a nice benefit, I will say. But without that damage himself, he's just kind of a waste of points when you could almost get a lieutenant who adds a similar amount of attacks at a similar quality. And also, 45 points, I mean, it's not exactly covering it, but that's getting you a good amount of the way there to like something like an Impulsor. That's not that far off, which is really useful for Bladeguard. They love Impulsors. They want to jump out of them all the time. But this guy is almost the cost of that and does not add anywhere near as much utility. It really is a shame, though. For the 45 points, he does effectively nothing. It really is a shame. His own weapon is just the biggest problem. I think he's almost there, just not quite. Hopefully in the next balance pass they'll give him something, though I doubt it. But it is a shame. He's a really cool model, one of my favorite models from Indomitus. Very classic 40k. And I would love to use him on the tabletop, but there's just not much reason to. Ancients as a whole aren't very good, and this guy certainly does not break the mold. Anyways, I've been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.